Hello, welcome to The Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. This is a pretty fun video, and this video is unfortunately a little bit of a drama video, so I don't want you to get too kind of worried that I'm hitting clickbait out, and that's not the content that I like to make. This is actually to do with competitive Age of Sigmar in a lot of ways, but it's also to do with time and reality itself. I know that sounds a little bit OTT, but we're going to get into it. Let's give you a bit of backstory first, though. If you have, unfortunately, heard about the golden ticket system, what is happening in the Age of Sigmar world is if you go to events, some people will win a golden ticket, which is basically free entry to the Warhammer World Championships, a event that happens in Atlanta every year. You sometimes, but not most of the time, get given money to travel and also to stay there, but not most of the time. So it's actually quite an expensive lodestone that you get given. Either way, many people see this as something really good to have got, and they're really excited about attending the event in Atlanta. Cool. That makes sense. You've won an event in your local community. Everyone in your local community is like, whoa, bro, you got a ticket. Are you going to go? It's like, I've never been to America. It's actually kind of fun. It's kind of fun, but I don't like it. But we'll talk about that in another episode. All right. So that's happened. So what's the problem, Rob? Well, let's talk about last year. Last year, unfortunately, if we look at the final of the Age of Sigmar World Champion event, whatever the hell it's called, it went on for 7 hours. 7 hours is pretty crazy. I myself run events, and each one of my rounds that people can play is 3 hours. Those 3 hours are divided evenly between the two players. Each player gets half of the amount of time. When you buy a ticket to an event, I basically guarantee that you get half of the time of each game, and so does your opponent. That seems fair. In some places, this is instituted via a chess clock, or as we'll later know, it's called a split time device, but we'll come to that in a moment. A chess clock is a really simple and easy way of utilizing the time. You get half the time, I get half the time. Seems very fair. It's used in many things, like chess, as an example, to make sure that that's fair. Some people don't like it. They think it's doing away with the ethos of what should be a casual game. But at an event, the event does have a schedule. Maybe food is coming. Maybe the venue closes. Whatever the situation might be, sticking to the schedule of an event is something you have to do, and a clock is the most appropriate and easy way to do it. It's used all around the world. It's used at the World Team Championships for different game systems. It's like the standard. It's the standard. However, Games Workshop did not use it last year. The event organizer, specifically the head of Games Workshop's events, a guy called Mike, doesn't like chess clocks, or, allegedly, I have heard, is not someone who likes chess clocks. Also someone who previously ran Nova, doesn't like clocks. Clocks aren't something he loves. And therefore, clocks were not instituted last year, but the game went on for 7 hours. That is a nightmare, as I assume you can understand, right? So you want to make it so the event runs a bit better. So they have instituted a draft policy for how they're going to deal with time and people mismanaging time at the upcoming championships. And it's going to blow your mind because it's 3 pages long and, pretty excitingly, doesn't use clocks. Let's talk about it. Let's go through it. Because the first statement in this article, you can see it here, the first statement in this article is insane. This is really important because this is going to completely change, but I need you to know at this point I'm using sarcasm because it shouldn't change. Just to be clear and serious for a moment, little side edit. You should only use an appropriate amount of time in your games. You should only use half the time, and your opponent should only use half the time. If your opponent brings 300 zombies and you bring 4 gargants, they don't get more time than you just because they have a big army. That is silly. That's selfish. Don't let that happen. With that said, straight back to sarcasm. Okay, so the game of Age of Sigmar, according to Games Workshop and their representative, is designed to be timed not by an even split of real-world time, but by an even number of battle rounds and player turns for each player. Interesting. So you are not meant to split time evenly when you're playing a game. You are meant to just vibe it out. Should your opponent take more time because they've got more stuff to do? Yes, that's on them. And is that your fault? Is it their fault that they've got more stuff to do and they chose an army with loads of actions and everything else? Right? No, it's not their fault. Okay, so Games Workshop has just said, in huge news, not by an even split of time. So now your time is not split evenly. Again, just side note, just to be clear, you should split your time evenly. Straight back in. Okay, so don't do that. Don't split your time evenly, right? Thus, Thus, the default use of a split time device, you can see it there, split time device, from the beginning of a game is not in keeping with the design intent of the rules. Okay, so what they are saying in this article is when they decided to write Age of Sigmar 4, they intentionally did not design the game to use an equal amount of time between each player. And instead, they wanted you to vibe it out. All right, that is the design intent of Age of Sigmar, in that one person can take way longer than you. That is an official Games Workshop statement in one of their packs. And that's an insane statement to make. An insane statement to make, because now this is just given so many people, you can go to your local game club, you can just take 2 hours to deploy, your opponent's like, bro, like an even amount of time. You're like, don't worry, that's not the game, that's not the intent. That is not the intent. I can do whatever I like. Perfect. Okay. The split time device at the beginning of the game is not in keeping with the intent of the rules, and thus is inappropriate. And if you ever seen someone with a chess clock in the future, I need you to scream the word inappropriate at them at the top of your lungs. As a default way to measure and evaluate the game of Age of Sigmar, inappropriate. Some people might say this video is inappropriate. I don't agree. I think this is very appropriate. I would say the use of a chess clock is disgusting. And people who use one are inappropriate and gross, and I hate them. Right? They're tacky, and I hate them. That's what I'm going to say. Okay? Inappropriate. Within the framework of a tournament or event, however, real-world time is still a finite resource. I know what you were asking earlier. Rob, when do we get to the question of reality? Here we are. They have acknowledged that time is real and is a finite resource, potentially. We don't know if Games Workshop knows something about the end of time, or if time is something that may well eventually run out in this cosmos. I don't know where we are up to with unified string theory and all of the aspects of physics, but Games Workshop has some concept that time is is a finite resource and eventually will run out. And time and clock policies must be in place to ensure all games finish on time while adhering to as close representation as possible of the game's natural turn order and design intent. So it's important to note that while time is a finite resource, we must use time and clocks. However, Age of Sigmar has not been designed to think of time and clocks in its design process. Thus, Age of Sigmar exists outside of the concept of time. And playing Age of Sigmar is not time-related unless you're doing it at an event. Okay, that's very important to remember. To support this requirement, the World Championships Warhammer begins by having no more than 2 games per day with 4 hours. They get an hour lunch, so it's a 4-hour round. Okay, fine. All players are expected to attend with confidence and readiness to complete their games with 4-hour windows. To support this, we've established a set of timing benchmarks called milestones that work to ensure all games remain on time. Okay, so milestones. I do have a milestones meme somewhere. Let me just find it. I think it's... No, that's later. No, that's a clock manager. We'll get to those in a bit. No, that's, again, a clock manager. It's another clock manager. Let me just... you don't want to be near a split time device. That's bad. No, that's an operative still. There we go. Split time devices, time splitting milestones. Amazing. That's what we want. We want a time splitting milestone, but not a split time device. That would be inappropriate, as we all know. Okay. So, we've established a set of time and benchmarks called milestones that work to ensure all games remain on time. Long game lengths, active judging, and milestone calls are expected to ensure a vast majority of those games finish on time. Vast majority, not all. They're not going for 100%. They're going for just some. Some games will finish on time. Okay, maybe a vast majority. I don't want to downplay it, as was the case for the majority of the games of the 2023 event. But as we know, not all of the games. Those games that fall behind will be adjudicated by our clock policy. I'm going to stop you there. I know what you're saying, Rob. It's insane to say that there's a clock policy when, as we know, using a clock in Age of Sigmar, a split-time device in Age of Sigmar is inappropriate. Well, then we've got a clock policy. And when necessary to ensure that a minimum games which will clearly go far beyond the milestones without intervention are provided with a fair portion of remaining time for each player. How they will decide to split up that time is insane, which we'll get to in a bit. And while still helping all games finish on time against the overall event schedule and place of play. As detailed below, there are also accommodations in place should one player use significant majority of time prior to the initiation of a clock. And so we will be initiating a clock, but not at the beginning, because it's against the design intent of the game. It's important to remember, and it's inappropriate. Okay, milestones. How do they work? They're pretty simple. What they do is they split up the 4-hour round into different sections, and then at each of those sections, they'll call out, you're at milestone, whatever, you need to be at this part of the game. So you get given 10 minutes each, so 20 minutes between you at the beginning to do pre-game activities, review army lists, and select secondaries if fixed. Then you get given 15 minutes each to do deployment, and then you get 25 minutes each to do the first turn. Okay, so these are the milestones. And if you miss some of these milestones, you're going to get clocked. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, how are you going to be able to keep within these milestones? You won't know. You have to vibe it out. You and your opponent, because you don't have a clock or access to a clock, are just going to have to guess when you've used your 25 minutes. I guess you could maybe use a stopwatch or a clock on your phone, or on your phone or your watch or something similar. But I'm not sure if they're legal because you can't use clocks. So and they're definitely not appropriate. That's important. They're inappropriate. So I'm not really sure how you would keep track of that information. Okay, well, there's people who are going to help you. We'll talk about those in a moment. Should a game fall behind on milestones, it will trigger the WCW's clock policy. So Warhammer World Championships of Warhammer's clock policy. That's what it's going to be. Okay. The following is detailed explanation of the clock policy for WCW. In short, a clock may be applied to a game by and only by WC staff. Repeatedly missing milestones and incurring use of clock can carry penalties to your time. Pretty bad. All right, let's go to the next page. Okay. The use of a split time clock, also referred to as a chess clock or a death clock, and hereby after referred to simply as a clock, at the WCW follows several criteria for use, guided by the key principles above. Number 1, players themselves may at no point preemptively request or utilize a clock. So even though it's standard tournament practice, and even though these are some of the better players in the world, and even though many of these people would have won their golden ticket by attending an event where chess clocks are mandatory to players who are used to using chess clocks, if not only just to make sure that their time that they use is an appropriate amount of time, they cannot request a chess clock, even if both players agree. Cannot. All right, easy peasy. Players are expected to cooperatively remain ahead of their milestones, contacting a judge proactively if they believe one opponent is causing their game to fall behind. But what if they don't? A judge may always apply a clock to a game at any point if they merit it necessary to ensure a fair conclusion to an unusual game circumstance. Interesting that in order to conclude a fair conclusion to a game, they are going to use a clock, even though clocks are inappropriate to use to measure time. Judges may always apply a clock to a game on a discretionary basis, so someone could just use a clock, which would be nice. Any game that falls behind on its milestones will have a clock applied. This will primarily be adjudicated by designated clock management staff. This is important because we've got a lot of memes about them. They're very fun people. Yeah, they're up here. You got Abe Lincoln in Time Cop. Very fun. This guy might be clock management staff, I think. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. This is time management agent who's very upset that the tournament player is just excited about a chess clock. Yeah, Cogsworth. There's a lot of clock management memes that are occurring. So let me know if you've seen any clock management memes. They're very fun. Please make your own and send them to me. Okay. So the clock managers will be walking around, potentially covered in clocks. I don't know. I don't know what the expertise is. Whenever a clock is activated for a game, the time must be split by a judge or clock staff, and the first activation of the timer must be done by that staff member. Thereafter, both players are expected to actively manage their own time in alignment with best practices. Should there be any issue with the clock or management at any time, call a judge. So once time has run over because the milestones have not worked, you are going to use a chess clock. And then, split time device. And then that split time device will be just under the management of the two players. Like it could have been from the start, but that would be inappropriate, which we don't do because it's against the design philosophy of the game, which we are cool with. That is good. Do they explain how to use a split time device? I don't think they do explain how to use a split time device. I don't think that's in here. Whenever a clock is activated, oh yeah. In case games are placed on a clock due to falling behind on milestones, an additional 20 minutes is added onto the 4-hour round. And it will also be added to total round time. These 20 minutes will be split evenly, ensuring players regain any perceived lost time due to what occurred prior. Should a judge determine that one player has used a significant majority of their game prior to the clock being activated, these 20 minutes can be split unevenly on a discretionary basis. So if my opponent takes up 30 minutes, they'll get to add 20 minutes onto the round. They'll get 10 more minutes. I'll get an additional 10 minutes. So I'll lost 20 minutes. They'll have gained 40 minutes. Seems like a bad system, but is obviously appropriate, and that's important. We need to be that. This is where we get into the debuff stage of clock management. Now, if you have been playing Age of Sigmar, you'll know that there's lots of keywords that are located at the bottom of special abilities and some statuses, as an example. Like if you've been playing Tzeentch, obviously you've got the burning mechanic or the disease mechanic. So you can have a debuff applied to you as a player at the event called the clocked status or the clocked debuff. Okay? I think it's coming to a faction soon. I'm not sure. Maybe it's the next GHB. The number of times you trigger a clock, don't forget that's both players will trigger a clock, due to missed milestones will be tracked by staff. Repeatedly triggering a clock will penalize your time eventually against players who triggered significantly fewer clocks than you. What? Okay. Anytime a player is placed on a clock at the WCW match for any reason, their clock status will be increased by +1. For example, a player's clock status will immediately become clocked 1 upon the activation in their first clock in the game. So if you've overrun in a game, you and your opponent will get clock status 1. Okay. If, when two players are placed on a clock, and if their clock status is increased by +1 each, there is a difference of 2 between their respective statuses. I know sometimes this is complicated. I will be making a graph in the future. The player with a lower status will receive 60% of the remaining game time, and the player with a higher status will receive 40% of the remaining game time. But obviously, you can get clocked even further. I have heard if you get clocked 5, then they take you around the back and they kick you in the head. Again, allegedly, not sure that's absolutely true, but that's what I've heard. Okay? That's what I've heard. Not necessarily true. I agree with Short Kings. Clock profiling should be illegal, but here we are, right? So if the difference is 3, okay, the player with a lower status will instead receive 65% of the remaining game time, and the player with a higher status will receive 35% of the remaining game time. So this is the problem with the clocked status. Let's talk about that for a moment. Let's say I'm playing with a really fast army like Varangard as an example, and then I play against my opponent I play against 4 different players, all of whom are slow. All of whom are slow. Because they're slow, I get clocked every time, and therefore I am at clocked 4. My opponent is playing, and they're playing with a fast army, and they've also never played against anyone who's slow. So they arrive at the final. I'm about to win the event, and my opponent has got clock 0 or clock 1, and I've got clock 4, maybe even clock 5. Maybe I played 5 slow people. Who knows? Then we just be slow at the first bit of the game because it's the final, and I'd like to win the world championships. It's a big deal. And then immediately, they're going to split the time, so my opponent gets 65% of the time, and I only get 35% of the time. So I'm penalized for my opponents going slowly, and my opponent is not penalized because they didn't play anyone slow. Pretty bad. Pretty bad. So our actual final game, or maybe the most important game of my Age of Sigmar career, is dictated by other people being slow in previous games, not the actual game in front of me, which could be resolved with a clock, but that would be inappropriate, which we don't want. Also, as a clock status 5, I've heard I win a special award. I'm not sure what it is. Sounds good. I'm excited about it. It's going to be pretty cool. Then there's a bunch of examples. Those examples are pretty insane, which is fun. Then they talk about time running out. And a bunch of different stuff. But what they effectively say is, it's a really good sentence, actually. It's something about being fair. But what they effectively say is, if there's a situation with a clock where a clock is needed, they're going to use a clock so that there is a fair use of time at the end, which is inappropriate. It's inappropriate. So I'd like to know what you think in the comments below. I'd like to know what you think. I'd love to know. Me and the chat have been talking about this for a little while now. I got to say, it's probably the dumbest thing I've read ever. Like, and I've been on the Age of Sigmar Reddit. Like, that's dumb. I have been in a lot of places, and I myself have written things, and I'm dumb, right? And I know this has gone on a little bit, so probably give me a clock status 2, right? That's probably fair. But it's pretty crazy. And like, there is like a real world cost to this. Like, it's funny, right? Most of us, it doesn't affect, and it doesn't affect anybody who's probably watching this video, but it does affect some real world people. These real world people who maybe have booked out that part of, because you got to remember, this only came out yesterday or the day before. So these people have like booked holidays, taken time off work. Maybe it's some of their like rarest like holiday time. They've saved up money to be able to travel to Atlanta to compete in a world championships of Warhammer. And they're very, very excited. And now they've got this looming threat that their games might not be fair. And the very simplest process of ensuring a game is fair is because one person has got a personal bugbear with something. The entire tournament community use clocks a lot. Are there problems? Sure. Sometimes there are problems, but those problems are almost indicative of a person being a problem and not the clock being a problem. It's also using loads of other game systems like War Machine Horde, chess, and a bunch of other game systems, right? And it's really common practice. And that real world cost is what really is breaking my heart. It's really funny. I mean, it's hella funny. I think I'll be looking at memes all week. You wouldn't split time. Very funny. I mean, I'll never not see a chess clock now and scream inappropriate. Split time device is just a great meme. The milestones meme is super dumb. I love that. This is good, right? Games Workshop don't know the difference. I'm really excited about all of the time managers. They're fun. That's really good, like good content that I can't wait to talk about more. Like, this will be an ongoing meme for me and my community for a long time, right? Cogsworth just working at the event. This is, I mean, incredibly accurate. Ban time splitting devices, put in milestone based on splitting time, have someone's job be to monitor splitting the time, give them the time splitting device anyway. That one's fun. And the last one, I'm something of a clockblocker myself. Like, these are all really funny, but there is a real world cost, and I want to be really conscious of that. And I want to say that, like, I'm really sorry to the people who are affected by this, who are going to compete at the highest level. And I assume a bunch of people aren't going to be overly bothered because they're like going for the social aspect, or they're just excited to go to Atlanta and play whatever the situation. And the system will probably work all right, like not great. And there's a much simpler process. It feels insane that the sheer volume of time spent on writing that process, and also not how clocks work as well in a document, when they could just say use chess clocks very commonly. But it is classic Games Workshop. It's classic, it's classic corporate management overriding something. And also is really indicative of what we see in at least Age of Sigmar, is we see a couple of people having a direct effect, like their personal feelings, having a direct impact on how the entire independent kind of general consensus, like the whole community generally tends to work. Because there might be someone who decides that this is going to be the process to use in the future, which I think would be obviously insane to do, and we don't want to see that happen. Obviously, it's not something that I would ever do, and I think most tournament organisers wouldn't do it because it's pretty silly. But you could see something like it in the future, and that's really bad because we're trying to get away from the stigma that a chess clock is gamey or negative. A chess clock is just so that you can have half of the time and your opponent can have half of the time. I've seen people use a chess clock and be like, "Boom, it's my time. Do you want to go to the bar?" And they're like, "Yeah, it sounds nice." Or like, "Oh, I've just got a phone call. I've really got to take this. It's going to be on my time. Don't worry about it." And off they go. It's really okay. And some people might ask, by the way, what happens when a chess clock ends? What happens is you can't do anything else in your turn. That's how it works. And you shouldn't ever want to have more time than your opponent, because that's selfish. Anyway, very funny. I've had a great time. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching my video. See you soon. Bye.